Hello, good afternoon. It's Friday, January 15th. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time. I'm Alison Pitt, and this is Daily Star Trek Views. Hello and welcome. Today, we have a really big show. We're doing the wrap up for season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. And I've taken some of your feedback, and I'll be talking about that as and when as I go through. And also, I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think. So keep the chat going. I'll try and grab some comments as we go through because there's a lot to cover. Basically, all of the stuff that I've been saying all season that I'm not going to talk about until the end of the season. It's the end of the season, so I'm going to talk about it. Hello to everyone who's in the chat already. It's nice to see you guys here. There's some familiar faces and there's some new people too, which is great. BC, I'm going to do something just for you. Hey, it's not quite a new moon at the moment. It is now waxing. According to my my night sky app, the moon is at 4% today, so you get a little sliver. It's going to turn off halfway through. That's why I don't usually do it for the live streams because it's on a after 15 minutes it turns off. But I'll try to keep on top of it. You're the first person ever to notice, so well done, BC. All right. Listen up. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be talking about Star Trek Discovery Season 3, and I have a very lengthy list of notes that I'm going to cover, so I won't be looking at the chat. I'll come and check for bits and pieces. Before we start, I just want to talk a little bit about some internet etiquette that if you guys could adopt and share and help would just really help me out. I don't know if any of you guys know, this is basically a solo operation. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So I have Chris, who writes about half of the content that we produce, and I also have Marina, who helps compile all of the events. But in terms of the production, the social media and stuff like that, when you're interacting with Daily Star Trek News, you're interacting with me. Something came up today. There's a story about Mary Wiseman out that has generated a lot of notice on social media. And one thing that I'm noticing in particular is that it's actually really hard for me to moderate those conversations when people pile on to other people who are trying to be abusive or trolling. And so as a courtesy, please, if you see somebody who is behaving inappropriately in response to something that I post, I do actually check all of those things. I don't post so much that I can't go and read the comments, and I try to catch those and hide those. But if you start replying or engaging in a conversation with those people who then kind of escalate a conversation, it becomes exponentially more difficult to moderate because Twitter in particular, you can't cut a conversation off at the head. You can do that pretty easily in YouTube. Facebook, I can't see almost anything in Facebook because it's a nightmare. But Twitter in particular, I try to keep it pretty sensible, but it makes it very difficult when it's 20 replies deep. So if you guys see that, feel free to drop me an email or a line if you see somebody being particularly bad, but probably I've seen it and I'm trying to moderate it as best I can by cutting that off, but it's harder when other people pile on and it becomes this big branched horribleness. So, I'm sorry. I'm hoping that this is not going to be a problem today. Sorry. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but the gist of it is, if you see somebody being awful on social media, Twitter in particular, don't engage with them. Please just leave that to me. Let me do my job, and I'll take care of it. So, thank you. Okay, so what we're doing today, I will tell you now. I go over this show every day. It goes over a half an hour, and it's probably going to today because I have a very lengthy list of things, and there are some bits that I want to talk about that I'm really passionate about. So sorry, just warning you about that ahead of time. What I'm going to do is basically talk through a couple of the biggest themes that I saw from this season. And I've got a couple of pieces of feedback that you guys have sent in as well. One of the big things that we're going to talk about towards the end of the show is Michael Burnham and her arc in particular. And that's something that's really important, I think, to talk about. Because she's a Black woman at the head of a Star Trek series. But also, I've been pretty, I've laid it out there. I've never really gotten Michael Burnham's character. But I think that's changed a bit, and I want to talk about why, and I want to talk about the implications of that, but we'll get to that towards the end. Anyway, all right. Okay, so I'm going to lead off the show today with actually a piece of feedback. So most of the feedback that you guys gave me was stuff that I can actually talk about in the show. So I will do that. There's one piece of feedback that I wanted to pull out and talk about just ahead of time because it didn't quite fit anywhere with any of the other themes that I was talking about. And I think it's an interesting concept to kind of consider. So this comes from Putty Animal on YouTube. And they said, I regret that I did not enjoy the story and script for this season. And then they went on to explain something that I've seen a lot of times and something that has affected me, which is basically that the story that happened was not the story they expected, and it was not the story that they wanted. And then therefore you become disappointed in the story that actually ended up happening. So for instance, they say the burn sounded interesting as a concept at first, and I imagine that the almost instantaneous phenomena must have originated within the mycelial network unintentionally or otherwise, and the repercussions of that would have been something to explore. And then they went on to say it seemed very weak to explain it away as a result of some sort of faster than light adolescent anxiety. Okay. Criticisms of the plot aside, I think this is actually a really common thing that I see in the fandom that has affected me as well. You have an expectation of what you want your Star Trek to be like, and then there's naturally there's a disappointment when it doesn't end up being that. That's a phenomenon not just in fandom, but it also happens in real life too. And I'm trying to remember the phrase. I should have written it down. You're basically mourning the loss of a future that will never be. And this happens in, in normal grief, or like if a relationship ends prematurely, or you had your mind set on going to a particular college and that doesn't happen. That period of disappointment and grief that you have is totally legitimate because you're basically mourning an entire universe of possibility that will never exist. And that's something that I know I'm like reading way into Putty Animal's feedback there, but I do think that kind of reaction is at the heart of some of the disappointment that fans feel about Star Trek Discovery in particular, because it was the first one back from that lengthy break. And I think it repeats itself over and over again, and I'm victim to it as well. But I just wanted to call that out and point out that it is an absolutely valid response, that sort of disappointment that the plot didn't end up being what you wanted. But I also think that I want to shy away from saying that just deal with it, because I do think that the Star Trek, any fandom, also bears some of the responsibility for that, and that leads me into the first point that I wanted to talk about for season 3 of Star Trek Discovery as a whole, which was the fact that this season, in my opinion, was much better balanced of an episodic versus a serialized type of storytelling. And then this is one of the two things that I talked about very early on in the season that I said I was not going to harp on about the whole time. Number one was I'm not a fan of serialized storytelling. And number two was Burnham doesn't have to be the center of everything. Like I said, we're going to talk about her later. I think that this season did a much better job of blending an episodic type of story that I think is more traditional Star Trek storytelling, and also a sort of serialized longer term arc, which is the sort of norm in modern Hollywood television shows. And I kind of didn't think that there was, like, I kind of saw it as a binary before, right? That you either are episodic or you're serialized. And I think they actually struck a pretty good balance in this time. So hang on, I just got a really weird notification. All right. That notification was nothing. My computer likes to tell me that my AirPods are connected when they are not. Where was I? Oh, episodic and serialized. So, yeah, most of the episodes in this series, sorry, not series, season, that's my British coming out, were kind of that format that there's an A story, an A plot, a B plot, and then the kind of underlying story arc. And there were a couple of longer story arcs. There was finding the source of the burn. There was also the strife and the negotiations with the Emerald Chain. Those were woven really well together so that they kind of ebbed and flowed nicely across the season. The downside to there being more sort of episodic stories is that there were a lot of episodes that were kind of forgettable. But having said that, I'm totally okay with that because there are still stories in TNG, and then TNG is like my favorite Star Trek series. There are a lot of those episodes that are totally forgettable. That's okay because it still means that you can dip in and out. And in terms of like the cadence across a season, that still works for me. The exception to that, of course, is the Mirror Universe episodes. I thought that those two, and I talked about this when I talked about that two-parter in these live shows. I thought that the timing and the just where they decided to slot those two episodes in, because they were pretty standalone, was really perfect. It broke up the season and kind of they were memorable. And it was fun. Like it was, Star Trek being fun, which I missed. And we got that call back to the Guardian of Forever. It was just a romp, right? And I thought that placement in there was really great to break up the story arc and also add to the tension that we then were able to resolve in the last 3 episodes. So that was good for me. I will say that I miss Georgiou. I'm sad that she's gone. I'm also glad that she's gone. I wrote in my notes that she was like that burr. Do you remember the burr on the underside of the captain's chair in Discovery that Burnham told Tilly about before she left? Georgiou was a little bit like that burr to me, she was this sort of thing that stuck out of the crew. And when the storytelling was getting a bit bland, they would go to Georgiou because she was exciting and interesting and an anomaly. And I mean, it's Michelle Yeoh, so like she like steals every scene she's in because she can't help it because she's Michelle Yeoh. And I do think that even though I loved her character and I loved her performance, I'm glad that she's gone because I think it will allow the rest of the cast to kind of flourish and grow into a thing without this wonderful, amazing woman. I was about to say this thing, and that would be rude. Without this wonderful, amazing woman coming in and stealing the spotlight all the time. Long story short, the blend of episodic versus serialized, I think they hit just the right note. I mean, I would love for us to go back to Forehead of the Week TNG style, TOS style, go for it. But I don't, I know the realities of binge watching and algorithms and all of that other stuff, audience retention. I don't think it's realistic to ask a modern television studio to go fully episodic. So I was happy with the balance and tick. I would not have said that halfway through this season, but there we are. Let's see. So the next thing that it kind of leads on from the episodic and serialized, because that to me, the idea of an episodic Star Trek is much more Star Trek. I hate that question. Is it Star Trek? Well, yeah, literally it is. But it's the feeling, right? This season of Discovery felt aspirational again to me. And let me put that into context for you. So TNG, and I'm sorry I keep talking about TNG, but that's my Trek, so just live with it. TNG was very utopian, post-scarcity society. It's the Hilton in space. It was very much designed that any kind of strife or conflict that they came up against was external, and the Federation were the ones going in and solving all the problems and things like that. Um, I appreciate the aspirational nature of that. It's showing us the possibility of that future, and what we can strive to. And while we aren't there, I mean, I think I don't want to. I think it's probably outdated storytelling to tell things that way, which makes me sad. But I think we're getting closer, and part of the reason that I think that is because this season overall, the storylines really centered on mature themes, not like mature themes. It's not Klingon boobs, thank God. Um, uh, they centered on compassion, they centered on trust, and they centered on relationships. And really, all of the action that we saw. Okay, the burn was caused by an adolescent. Well, he's a young man who really basically dealing with his trauma. With the absence of any kind of help or assistance or support, we had great conversations about trust between Admiral Vance and Commander Burnham, Admiral Vance and Saru and Burnham, and um, Osira and Vance. There was a tremendous. They played with the idea of trust, and how we rebuild something like the Federation after it's been destroyed. And I love that, and everything was really focused on relationships, which I think is something that's so key to like the human element that it's great to see that in Star Trek storytelling. Um, we also had talking about growth from trauma, which was something that I really I felt very strongly in seasons 1 and 2 of Star Trek Discovery, that they did a very bad job of teaching us how to grow from trauma. And the example that I would use is when Culber was killed. Um, I won't rehash that entire argument, but I hated that they killed Culber. I thought it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I hated it even more when they brought him back. Not because I dislike Wilson Cruz, because I think he's wonderful, but they once they'd made the decision to kill him off, they had an opportunity to show a character who grew through their trauma, and they didn't. They just brought him back, and they had like 1 or 2 episodes where they were a little bit, wobbly, and then they were back to normal. And I look to Star Trek as a guide of how you can be better, and they missed that opportunity. Fast forward to season 3, I don't think they did that at all. They centered on Su'Kal's trauma later in the season, but they also talked. If you think about the Federation as a living, breathing thing, they worked through what the Federation had to do to cope with their trauma. And then on another sort of personal level, they talked about Burnham and the trauma that she went through, and kind of helped her pull out of that sort of tumultuous journey into a place where she's much more stable. Oh, and I've also got written down here Nivar. But again, the Romulan and the Vulcan people both experience different kinds of trauma, and then them coming together to team up and grow out of that. I think, again, it's Star Trek showing us a really great model of how to not sort of neglect or pass over or forget trauma, but just to incorporate it and learn and grow from it. And that was 2 thumbs up for me. More aspirational things. Ethnic and racial diversity was front and center of this series, and especially the promotion of Black heroes, which I just think was wonderful. They drew a lot of criticism for it, mostly from ignorant people, and I think they need to keep going on the route they're going. I remember. I want to say the first episode featured no white people at all, and I think that was wonderful. It was a good choice, and it's reflective of our society and where we need to go going forward. So keep on that, Discovery. And then the final thing I'll talk about on a similar vein is that the they promoted LGBTQ issues in a really organic way, and particularly transgender and non-binary people. Number one, obviously, by representing them as characters in the show. Number two, by employing transgender and non-binary actors in the show. That's a really big step forward as well. And they also, I said that they handled it in an organic way. And what I mean by that is that in 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 one way, they just showed transgender and non-binary people just being and doing their thing, but they also made sure to emphasize key issues like Adira's coming out, or when Gray and Adira kissed early on. Both of those things are really important to actually show on screen on television, and they did that, and it worked without being like having an entire episode about Adira's coming out. That would have been a little heavy-handed, because what I wanna see from, an inclusive type of storyline is people, existing in their real lives, and, being normal because they are normal, we are normal, um, and I the point being, I think that the word would be, deftly. I think that the writing was deftly handled for some of these issues, and it came out with, I think, a very good, natural feeling diversity and inclusion, which is, it I can't say anything other than that it's really, really important to me. We are better when we are all celebrating each other as individuals. Anyway. Um Oh, and, they get bonus points for the whole ecological message. I'm gonna skirt over that today, but, like, there was a huge ecological message, and there always has been in Discovery. They get, um they even get a bit of extra credit for the return of the Gormagander, who I advocated a lot should be killed in season 2, or is it season 1? The hairy mud one. I was like, "Just kill the space whale," but I'm glad. That's a show for another day. Right. So, let me just really quick take a quick look in the chat. Hello, everybody. Sorry that I was monologuing for about 20 minutes. Um Okay, so I have a bit of feedback here from Hal Morrison on YouTube, who said, "Well, this was definitely the best season of Disco for me. I feel that the writers don't put effort into the technical aspects of the show, which at least some of us really enjoy and care about. This trip into the far future afforded an opportunity to see the progression of the technology we all love, and they almost did it, but not quite." Um, and I actually agree. I thought that was a good way to put it. I do think that some of the technology was a little like, I see the programmable matter as a little bit of a get out of jail free card, because they can just make whatever they want whenever they need it. I I'm the detached nacelles and stuff, now that we know that that was kind of a plot point, I actually think that's kind of interesting that they kind of made it and then it became a plot point later on. Um, what I thought was really interesting is towards the end of the series, the last 2 episodes, like, I started to be okay with it, which I didn't think, 'cause when I first saw the programmable matter, I was like, "This is dumb." Like, I hate it. I What happens if it breaks? That if you remember, those Star Trek logs that are on, Instagram, the one that was for Commander Reno, where they confirmed that there are holodecks now on the USS Discovery. Reno was like, "I don't even know how to fix this. If something goes wrong, like, duct tape is not gonna work on programmable matter." And I still think that's a really interesting concept that I think they're gonna have to explore at some point. Kinda getting used to it. I was really pleased, 'cause when they rebooted the computer core, didn't they say they went back to the normal Discovery operating system? That was cool. That was, like, a nice little nod, and, Yeah, I'm of two minds. Discovery in the past has kind of fallen back on kind of like a mystical, magical theme rather than sort of what I feel was achievable technology. But then I could be coloring that because I look back at TNG now and I'm like, oh, yeah, all that technology is totally achievable. With the exception of the transporter, but oh, it's a pad, and like, oh, now we have iPads. I could be coloring that because I don't actually remember what I felt about it at the time. We didn't have wireless phones. We didn't have cell phones and stuff. So I don't, my point is, yes, I agree that the technology stuff is a little hand wavy. I'm also becoming okay with it. I feel that it's part of the fabric of the Discovery culture now. The and I'm sorry, but the turbo lifts are here to stay. They're just they've now they've been featured so many times. I think that's how I think that's canon now. Sorry. Okay, so now I'm gonna take a break because I need to like breathe for a second and have some water. This is my water cup, by the way. I've had this for years. It was a Think Geek sale when Think Geek still existed. So in the chat, BC has just said, "Bah, turbo lifts are not Wonkavaders." I actually think they are now. I don't make the show. All right. What's next on my list? We're getting much closer to my lengthy list of things about Michael Burnham, but I'm not going to go there quite yet. And I wanted to talk about, it's along the same line. So one of the common issues that I had early on in the season, well, I should say for all of seasons 1 and 2 and early on in Discovery season 3, was that the focus of the show really was on Burnham, and Burnham had to do everything and she had to be involved in everything. There's literally a line that I meant to go and look up what the exact wording was in Discovery season 2, right before Ariam gets blown out of the airlock. She literally says, "It's all about you, Michael." And it's like, boy, if that isn't like a meta conversation about the entire series. Now I say that with a little bit of hesitancy because I do think that it's worthwhile a show like Discovery throwing their weight behind a Black female lead. I think that's actually a really good thing. But my Star Trek has always been more ensemble than that. And there were some times when they centered Burnham so much that it took me out of the action that was going on, and it didn't make sense. Case in point, when they went to the Trill pool, I still don't understand why she was there, but it's fine. I had some feedback from William via email that kind of prompted me to think about this whole issue in a really interesting way. So he says, originally we thought this would be the first Star Trek series not centered on a captain. Finally, end of season 3, we end up with another Star Trek series centered on a captain. And what's interesting is you're right. When we first heard about Star Trek Discovery, once you got over the fact that her name was Michael, it was, oh, wait a second. So we're not focusing on a captain, right? And I actually thought that was interesting. I mean, I would argue that other series didn't focus on captains, but certainly like the lead of all the previous Star Trek series was the captain. And so that was an interesting development. What I didn't know at the time was that we were going to be so laser focused on that one person who wasn't the captain. But now, of course, if we're still laser focused on Michael Burnham, now she is the captain, which I think presents its own problems because logistically in universe, the captain shouldn't be the one doing all of the stuff, because, they're the captain. Will Riker would be like, "No way, you're not going on an away team ever again," right? Um, I will be interested to see whether they are able to sort of, move the focus away from the captain's chair onto more of the ensemble, and I'm hopeful because actually we've had some interesting conversations about leadership this season. So, some of my favorite parts were when we got to see Vance coaching Saru and coaching Burnham and Saru coaching various members of his team on their leadership skills, how they how they conduct themselves to win the support of their crew. As if you've been watching this show, I'm a huge supporter of Tilly being made first officer because she clearly has the hearts and minds of the crew. Um, there are some really interesting conversations to be had because Burnham is used to being a rogue. She has been a rogue since episode 1 of Star Trek Discovery, season 1. Now she's going to be expected to be the ship's leader, the center, the person who's, the rock and in charge of everything. She can't be just charging off to do her own thing. So there's some really interesting stories that I think they can tell in season 4. And I wonder if we will actually see a shift from a more individualistic type of storylines to a more broader ensemble storylines. And I've danced around it enough, so I think probably now is probably the time to go ahead and start talking about Burnham. Okay, so background, I just want to bring you up to speed again. I've never been a huge fan of Michael Burnham, and I'm self-aware enough to know that that is entirely possible, that I have just a tiny bit of a bigoted bone in my body. I don't necessarily think that I am bigoted or racist, but I'm not sure that I would be able to know or identify some of those things in myself. My chief concern about Burnham has really been that she doesn't deserve to have the authority that she is given. Certainly in the beginning of Star Trek Discovery season 3, I was like, she should not be the first officer. You can go back and listen to my argument. Because she just isn't. She doesn't fall in line. She doesn't listen. She's out on her own. And I never was able to kind of connect with her on that way, and that was true of the previous 2 seasons. I didn't like the fact that she was the center of attention all the time, and it just I never connected with her character. Things have changed in season 3, and I feel completely differently than I did at the beginning. I think that the writers here in this season they've showed what I'd consider to be a realistic and an earned journey for her, to come to a more mature place in her life. I actually wrote down I'm much better writing words than I am speaking them. The writers showed a realistic and earned journey for her that was sympathetic to her in-universe experiences, and an earned journey for her that was where is it? Brought her back to her pre-mutiny skill set. None of that probably made sense. So if you think about her as a gigantic character arc from Discovery season 1, episode 1 to now, she started off as somebody who was extremely Vulcan. She was raised by Vulcans. Everything she knew was being Vulcan, down to the Vulcan hello. And she had her world torn away from her. She had everything was in upheaval from pretty much the first time we met her. She's basically been surviving for the last 2 seasons, 2.5 seasons. And so I think that the writers have managed in the course of 1 season, and I'm very impressed with this, they've managed to take her from a place that was entirely like she was 100% rogue, I'm on my own, I'm surviving here, back to leveraging those skills and that personality that she was before everything went into upheaval, and also pulling in all of her experiences that she learned along the way. And I feel that at the end of it, she's become a more complete and whole person because of it. And I think she's going to make a great captain. Personally, this is the first time the end of this season that I've actually felt a personal connection to Burnham. And for me as a Star Trek fan, that means a lot to me. That makes me happy, because it really bothered me that I really didn't like that. I just never connected with her, and that's changed now. I think part of that is that some of what she experienced, I feel parallels some of my experiences as by the way, I have not been through any kind of the level of trauma that Michael Burnham has been through, but I can draw a slight parallel. So I'm what I would call an ex-expat. I left the United States and I lived abroad for many, many years, and then I left there and I came back. That kind of upheaval and cultural shift, you lose a lot in translation every time you do that. And it's taken me a long journey to remember what I was like before, and also incorporate all of the new experiences I had and actually come out the other side and kind of reattach myself to that. And so for the first time, I've actually seen a bit of a parallel in myself with Michael Burnham, and that has helped my enjoyment of the series a huge amount. I will say one final thing about my personal views on Burnham before I give some credit to somebody else. One thing that I never noticed about Burnham, because I was too busy being like annoyed by her all the time, but it's something that I can now look back and appreciate. She's a character who has always held on to joy, and especially they showed that a lot in this season in particular. If you've seen the screenshots of how happy she was when she finally found life signs after she crashed. When she was drugged in the mercantile and just like, and being goofy, that speaks to that underlying, she could have got angry, and she didn't. She got joyous, she got giggly and happy. And that speaks to her character as somebody who holds on to joy and finds joy in the small moments. And I really appreciate now. You even see that in her, her catchphrase now, "Let's fly." It's joyous, right? And I can really appreciate that now. And yeah, that's all I have to say. But I do want to give a lot of credit to Kennedy Allen, who's one of the hosts of Women at Warp. She's written a very, very good article. It just came out yesterday or the day before. That is talking about Michael Burnham and the double standards she faces as a Black woman leader in the Star Trek space. Please go and read that article. I will end up linking it underneath here when we're all done here, because Kennedy writes it in a way that totally makes sense. And I have a couple of quotes here that I would like to share with you to take away. She says, "Because so many women from marginalized communities consistently display exceptionalism in their work, that high level of performance is becoming normalized and removes all accountability from the systems that perpetuate such unrealistic standards." And she goes on to say, "Most marginalized women don't want or need praise. We need space to be our fully realized, complex selves without fear of each stumble resulting in loss of credibility." And I think Michael Burnham is a good example of that. Watching her become a fully realized person that is not one thing or another, and she's all of the things, has been a wonderful journey this season. And that's all I have to say about that. Right. Just a couple like little small things before I go. Well, I'm not going to go. I'm going to hang out and talk to you guys in the chat for a minute when I'm done. But one thing I forgot to say at the end of last week's live episode is the TOS theme tune. I've talked before about how amazing the sound design is for Star Trek Discovery and how clever they are of just putting little sound cues in that call back to other places. And I liked the TOS theme. It confused me because I thought, well, hang on, wait, are we gonna be like TOSy now and all episodic and forehead of the week? Is that, but that's what Strange New Worlds is. And I, I don't know. I'm trying not to think about it too hard because we'll know soon enough. I just thought it was very cool and exciting, and I loved it. Um, and I have two comments here that are speaking specifically to my uncertainty at the end of the last episode of this show, about, what is Discovery trying to be. Earl Grey Chucky 1701 says, I agree with you on Discovery constantly reinventing itself. Let's hope this is the last time they reboot the show, in a sense. And contrast that to Al Rivera, also on YouTube. And for those of you who don't know, Al works for Cryptic Studios. He's the lead designer of Star Trek Online. He's a very cool dude. He says, the fact that Discovery keeps changing and we don't know what's going to happen next season is exciting to me. I love that each season is different and unpredictable. Perhaps that is Discovery's identity. Each season is a new discovery. And I think that's it's a really cute turn of phrase. I, I, I don't know. Everyone always says that Star Trek doesn't hit its stride until the third season. I don't know that that's true. Um, I don't think we can make in much the same way as I decline to judge a lot of things in the middle of this season 3. We will have to wait and see how history judges the identity of Discovery as a whole. I will say that I'm disappointed that Saru never got his catchphrase, and I hope that's something that they remedy next season. But I will leave you with another little bit of feedback, a quote from another listener, Dave Miller, also on YouTube, who said, I'm looking forward to season 4. Let's fly. And I would just echo that sentiment as well. I'm also looking forward to season 4. Bring it on. All right, that is literally my entire gigantic thing of what I have to say. So I'm gonna try and grab a couple of comments from the chat. We'll hang out for a few more minutes until you guys get bored of me. How's that? Okay, I'm gonna work my way backwards today instead of trying to find the beginning, because the couple of times that I've gone onto the chat, I can see it's zinging. So I think I've missed a lot of conversation. Hosen Zarfungal says, 3rd season, Enterprise had me hooked at the intro theme. I say nothing. I actually haven't watched Enterprise, so I can't say much. BC says, Alison, do you think they sort of wrapped up season 3 in a way to suggest there won't be a season 4 with the theme, the Gene quote, generally happy ending? Lots of speculation about that on YouTube. Yeah, don't believe everything you hear on YouTube. No, I think that every season of every television show always wraps it up with a slightly, like, could end, could not end, because you don't know what's going to happen, especially in 2020. We don't know what's going on with the pandemic. I mean, it's out of control in Los Angeles. So I would say if anything, they were hedging their bets. I didn't read that. I didn't read into that at all. If anything, I genuinely think that the Gene Roddenberry quote was meant to be inspirational and hopeful. And I do believe that the people who are making Star Trek these days really believe in the Star Trek ideals. I think that what those ideals are changes depending on who you talk to, but I do think they want to provide people with hope and comfort, and I think that's what that was, not any kind of, hey, everything's canceled now. Where's my stickers? Wait. You know when I knocked my... It's because I knocked the mute button. I'm sorry. Yay. Okay. What I had said was Robert Kaiser. Was it Robert? Yes, Robert Kaiser was talking about that yes scream in episode 1 and how he'd like to do that at a convention, and I was recommending that you don't, because I think it might cause some alarm. So yeah. Yeah, I have those stickers are for sale on Etsy if you want to buy one. I might make them as a Patreon giveaway too. I have some things that I made for patrons, but I haven't figured out how to like get them to anyone yet. So anyway, sorry, I'm now scrolling backwards. We'll do this for another 5 minutes. Let me know if you've got any other burning questions too. Peter says, it looks like it's a conversation between Peter and Robert about loving Vance. And Peter says, I was afraid he would turn out to be a bad admiral toward the end, and I was glad that they did not. Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of this season and I talked about it a lot in my other live streams, was the playing with the idea of trust. I don't even know if it was like intentional, but I absolutely did not trust Vance at all. Part of that's because I watch a lot of Star Trek and there are a lot of admirals. But also some of the way he was acting. I mean, he didn't trust our dudes did not trust him. I didn't trust him. I mean, I don't think he has any opinion about me. But they kind of played with those ideas, even down to that conversation with Osira. I was like, is this guy gonna make an alliance with the Orions? I didn't know. So I'm glad the way that it turned out, because he was actually kind of wonderful and vulnerable and strong and great. So, BC has raised a good question. He says, what about that song that everyone knew this season that never really made much sense to me? There was a explanation of that, and I didn't quite, it was one of those ones that I was like, yeah, it's fine. It was something about that the Federation distress signal with the distortion of the nebula, and it was coming out to basically be this gigantic galactic broadcast, wasn't it? And that's why everybody knew it, because they just kind of heard it. Right. Okay. I think I'm caught up, so I'm going to come back in. All right. Robert makes a suggestion for sticker number 2. No, Alex Kurtzman wasn't fired. That's another of my fun ones. Yeah. I was actually having a conversation with Mohammed, who's in the chat. Hello, Mohammed. We had a chat this morning talking about his YouTube series, which I'll have that conversation up hopefully this weekend. And we were talking about sort of my process for when we're looking at rumors and things like that, and weeding them out. And I had to stop short of, because the conversation was not about me. The conversation was about Mohammed. Yeah, sometimes I feel like most of what I do here is making Star Trek really boring. So I can't tell you guys enough how much I appreciate you being here and interacting and making comments. I appreciate it a lot. Okay, so listen, I have covered an absolute ton of stuff today. These are all my thoughts, and I hope that something in there um, gives you some thought. I think that when we talk about uh, compassion and trust and things like that and themes of Star Trek, I think there are things that all of us can take away from a nice fictional science fiction show, and use them in our real lives. So try to be more like Trek, please. Um, Once again, thank you for coming. Thank you for turning up. Thank you for listening. If you like what we're doing here, it's this is me and my face, but I'm not the only one here. Please give credit to Chris Peterson and to Marina Kravchuk, who helped this all happen. And if you like what we're doing, please consider making a contribution on Patreon. The address is patreon.com/Daily Star Trek News, and there's options from $1 up. Bonus points if you get all of the stupid Star Trek references in the membership tiers. And also, if you choose to support us on a yearly basis, you get a discount. It's like 2 months free or something like that, and that helps us out a lot too. So I appreciate that. Okay, I have nothing else. I have no idea what we're going to talk about next week because we have no new Star Trek, but I'm sure I'll come up with something. And while I'm here, if you've got any burning questions, then drop me a line. It's info@dailystartreknews.com is the email address, and I'm always happy to take questions and considerations for things to talk about on the show. Like I said, I appreciate you being here, and thank you for staying so long. And we will see you next week. Live long and prosper.